Welcome to video number 2 in the class Microsoft 365 Excel, the complete story. And in this video, we got to answer a simple question. What does Excel do? It only does two things, broadly speaking, calculations and data analysis. So in this video, we're going to have an initial look at both of these amazing things that Excel can do. And then in the next two videos, 3 and 4, we'll go into much more detail. In this video, we're going to have a comprehensive introduction to worksheet formulas and pivot tables. Here are the amazing topics for this video, and we're going to start off by going to the sheet Calcs. Now, what is a calculation? For us, it'll be a math, logical, or data manipulation operation to create an answer. And we'll see examples of all three in just a moment. Now, the most important ways to make calculations in Excel, well, worksheet formulas, which is what we'll talk about in this video. Pivot tables can make calculations. Power Query M-code formulas can make calculations. And also DAX formulas in Power Pivot and Power BI. Now, with all sorts of different ways to make calculations, when we get to worksheet formulas in the worksheet, calculations that usually work best, things like math, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, academic grading, like creating a grade book, budgets, like projected sales for the next year, accounting, like payroll calculations or inventory valuation, finance, like the value of an investment, statistics, like mean, median, mode, standard deviation, and much more, regression, which is a part of statistics, and analytics, like linear programming or simulation. Now, I mentioned this whole list of things using worksheet formulas because sometimes you'll hear people say, well, Excel is dead because we have Power BI. Well, this is a list of everyday activities that are much more easily done in the Excel worksheet. Now, Excel worksheet formulas, they're going to create answers for us and will always have an equal sign as the first character in the cell. And they will contain things such as equal sign, cell references, math operators, numbers if they're never going to change, built-in functions like sum, round, left, and more, comparative operators, join symbol, and even text in double quotes. Now, let's scroll down and look at 3 awesome examples of Excel worksheet formulas. Now, our first formula in cell C22 is going to be using math operators, and we're going to create a number answer. Now, we have gross pay for an employee. And the tax rate, this is the actual FICA tax rate that employees pay in the United States, 0.0765. That's 7.65 pennies for every $1. Now, we want to multiply, so we select the cell. And a formula always has an equal sign as the first character in the cell. When you type an equal sign, you're saying, hey, Excel, I want you to create a formula. Now, the next element in the formula is going to be the cell reference for gross pay. So I'm going to take my selection cursor and click on cell C20. You can see the dancing ants, and the cell reference C20 is in the formula. When we use a cell reference, that allows us to change this value later, and the formula will update. Now I'm going to type the math operator for multiplication asterisk, either Shift-8 or the asterisk on the number pad. Now, instead of using my selection cursor to get the tax rate, I'm going to use the up arrow. Now, when do you use the mouse to select a cell, and when do you use the arrow keys? The rule is, if the cell references are close, it's much faster to use the arrow key. When the cell reference is far away, then it's easier to use the mouse. Now I need to enter the formula so the formula can calculate the answer. And anytime you create a formula, there are a number of different ways to enter the formula. Now I'm going to start off with the method that almost everybody uses. We're going to use the Enter key. But watch what happens when I use the Enter key. Enter. Sure enough, it calculates the answer, but it selects the cell below. Now, For right now, that's perfect. The formula calculated our answer, and this is a number formula that delivers a number answer. Now, this is payroll, and we have 83 pennies, but a bunch of extraneous decimals that we don't want. We actually want to round. Now, when you're rounding, you always have to pick the position, and this is money, so we're going to pick the penny position. That means from the right of the decimal 1, 2. Once we pick that position, we look to the right. That's 5 or greater, so we remove the decimals and add 1. So for this particular deduction amount, we need 84 pennies. Now, there's no way we are going to round everything by hand in Excel. Luckily, like there is a sum function for adding, there's a round function for rounding. Now, let's select the cell. And notice I'm editing the formula. The cursor's down here, so I have to reselect the cell. And I want to put the cell in edit mode, so I use the F2 key. When I do that, it puts the cursor at the end and allows me to edit. Now I want to put that formula element into the round function. So after the equal sign, but before the C20, I click with my I-beam cursor. I see the cursor is flashing. And now watch what happens when I type ROU, just the first few letters of the function. A drop-down appears with the name of built-in functions. We have round, and there's a screen tip that tells you what it does. That's the one that we want, but I'm going to use the down arrow because there's another round, round down. And the screen tip tells you exactly what it does, rounds down towards 0. Arrow, there's a round up. Now I'm going to up arrow. Now, once you have the function that you want selected in dark blue, you can use the Tab key to enter the function into the formula. Now, when I hit Tab, it capitalizes the function name and adds the open parentheses. Now, below each function we use, like round or sum, there's going to be a screen tip. This screen tip will list the requirements. These are called arguments. And so we can always read our screen tip to help us figure out how to complete the function. Now, the first argument is called number. That's the number that we want to round. In our case, it's that formula element. The screen tip will also be polite. It reminds you that you have to type a comma to get to the next argument. So very carefully at the end with my I-beam cursor, I click. And when I type a comma, the screen tip is polite. It bolds the next argument. In our case, number of digits. That's where we tell the round function which position we want to round to. So starting at the decimal and going to the right, I count 1, 2. Because the penny is in the second position, I type a 2 here. When I type a 2, I'm telling round to the penny. It does the rest. It knows the rule, so all we do is tell it the position. Now, if you're going further to the right, you would count 1, 2, 3, 4. Going to the left of the decimal, since this is 2 and this position is 1, that would make the dollar position 0, and then -1, -2, -3, and so on. Most of the time in business, we're sticking to 2 for the penny or 0 to round to the dollar. Now we have our two arguments. I close parentheses. If I hit Enter, that puts the formula in the cell and selects the cell below. But because my next action is to add number formatting to this cell, rather than entering and then clicking back up to add number formatting, to save a click, you can use Control-Enter to put the formula in the cell and keep the cell selected. That may seem inconsequential, but saving clicks like that throughout your whole Excel career adds up and saves time, maybe even enough for an extra day or two of vacation. Now, the next task is to format cells, so I'm going to use Control-1 to open Format Cells dialog box. In the Number tab, let's select Currency. 2 decimals is fine. That's the symbol. You can choose how to display your negative numbers. But I want you to notice that there's a sample up here. If I decrease the decimals, notice the sample is polite. It shows us how this number will be displayed. Now, right now, with 1 decimal, it looks like it's just 80 pennies. But if we use this number formatting, it does not change the underlying number. Now I'm going to move this back up to 2 decimals. When I click OK, now I've added number formatting to display that with a dollar sign. Let's do that for gross pay. I select Control 1, currency. Notice 75 pennies. If I were to show this or display this as 0 decimals, that's the number that will be displayed, but it never changes the underlying number. That 0.75 is still there. And in fact, let's see if I click OK. It looks like 2,155. But in some cases, when you're using number formatting, you can look up to the formula bar. Sure enough, those 75 pennies are still in the cell. And the reason that understanding number formatting as it's displayed is so important is because formulas do not see number formatting. That formula sees and is acting on the number 2,154 and 75 pennies. Now, if you really did want to change that number and get rid of the 0.75 by rounding, we would use the round function, just as we did here. We wanted to officially change the number, so we used round. Now, this is a gross pay amount with pennies. We definitely don't want to leave it with 0 decimals showing, because then that's using number formatting, and it's misleading. Now, you can use Control 1 and change the decimals. Or if you added your increase decimal button to your quick access toolbar, you can simply click, click. Now the number formatting matches the underlying number, and conveniently it shows a dollar sign and a comma. Notice those characters are not stored in the cell. Now we can add a percentage number format to display this decimal, which is a tax rate, by using number formatting. Control 1, number tab, percentage. 2 decimals is fine. There's the displayed number. The underlying number will still be that decimal, though. Click OK. And now the tax rate is displayed as a percentage and represents, for every $1, 7.65 pennies paid in tax. Now, the real beauty of Excel and worksheet formulas is that we can change any one of these formula inputs, and the formula instantly updates. Now, let's click in the cell. Remember, this has currency number formatting. Watch what happens when I type 3,010 pennies. Notice the dollar sign doesn't show up as we're typing. Now, watch what happens when I hit Enter. Instantly, the formula updates. Now, let's change the tax rate. And watch what happens. This is slightly different than currency. When I type 1.45, the percentage symbol is automatically there. But of course, when I hit Enter, the formula instantly updates. Now I'm going to use Control Z, Z to undo and leave the original gross pay and tax rate. All right, so this is a number formula. We used a math operator, cell references, and a built-in function. We talked about number formatting, and we also talked about the difference between officially changing a number with round and using number formatting. Now let's talk about another type of formula, a text formula. Our goal with a formula is to look at whatever we type here and only get the first name. Now this type of formula where we extract just part of some text is very common. We might get first name or last name, or we might want the state abbreviation from an address. Anytime you do a text formula where you're going to be extracting part of the data, you have to recognize a pattern. Now, in this simple example, it's easy. I just want everything before the space. Now, we're in Microsoft 365 Excel, so we have a brand new function called text before. I'm going to type an equal sign, text, and look, there are a lot of different text formulas. Split, join, before is the one we want. And we can read the screen tip. Returns the text that's before a delimiting character. The word delimiter just means what character separates the bits of data. So this is the function we want. We see it highlighted in blue, so I hit the Tab key. Now, there are a lot of arguments that do amazing things for us. But when you see a screen tip and there's arguments with square brackets, it will use a default setting. Now, Microsoft designed functions like this, because the ones that don't have square brackets are the ones that we use most often. So let's just try these two arguments, the text and what the delimiter is. Now I see text in bold, so I'm going to use my up arrow. I type a comma to bold the next argument. Now our delimiter is a space, but anytime you have text in a formula, even if it's a space, remember that space bar, that puts a character in. But anytime you have text in a formula, you got to put it in double quotes. So I put double quote, space, double quote. And whatever you do, don't just type two double quotes because then there's no character. So I got a space between double quotes. And that will do it. That formula will extract everything before the delimiter. Close parentheses. And when I hit enter, the formula extracts everything before the delimiter. We got the first name Chantel. And that formula is delivering text. So this is called a text formula. Now let's try and change it. We'll type Sue space Nolene, Control Enter, and bam, the formula is working. But what if someone only had one name, which happens when you have a list of names? When I hit enter, not available because there is no space delimiter. Well, let's F2 on this formula and backspace and investigate the remaining arguments. Now let's type a comma. Instance number, that means if we had multiple spaces, we could indicate maybe the second or third one. We don't need to indicate second or third. The default is the first one. So to skip the argument, we type a comma. Match mode, well, you can determine if you're looking for a character case sensitive or not case sensitive. We want to skip it, so I'll type a comma. Now for match end, there's a convenient drop down. 0 for don't match to end. And look at the screen tip. It says, if a match could not be found for a delimiter, return NA. If we down arrow to 1 that indicates match to end, match the delimiter against the end of the text. That means we will not get an NA. To select this option, we'll hit Tab. And the last argument, you could indicate what you want to put in the cell if the delimiter is not found. We don't need that one, so close parentheses and enter. That is beautiful. By the way, just as a comparison, here's the formula we had to use before we had Microsoft 365 and the amazing text before. Now I'm going to change this back to Chantel Mims and enter. All right, so that's a text formula. We did data manipulation with our formula. And guess what? We don't have to use number formatting on this cell because, well, that's text. Now, up here, somehow I got this formula in cell C22 to show up here as soon as I entered the formula. So I want to show you that down here because it's a great way to document what you did. Equal sign to start a formula, and then I'm going to type formu, and there it is, formula text. Returns a formula as a string. The word string represents the word text string, and text string is the fancy way in computer languages to say text. So that's what we want, tab. And all we need to put is the cell reference that contains the formula. Close parentheses, and when I hit enter, there we can see the formula. Now, what if I delete this? I'm going to use the delete key. Oh, I get an NA. Control Z. Well, let's click back in the cell, hit F2, and we can use another function before formula text called if NA. We'll take our I-beam cursor and click after the equal sign, type if N. And there it is in blue, so I hit Tab. Now, if NA was named smartly because it says if whatever this value is in NA, then please tell me what the value, if it is in NA, should be. So value, that's our formula text. We come to the end with our I-beam cursor. We type a comma. Value if NA is bold. And what I want the formula to do is show nothing. And the way you do that in a formula is you use double quote, double quote. Now, as we just learned, anytime we're using quotes, that means that is text. But really, this is text with no length. And it is the syntax that we use inside a worksheet formula to show nothing. So close parentheses. Now when I hit enter, for the time being, it's showing the formula. But if I delete and the cell is empty, that formula there is showing nothing. Now if you click in the cell, up in the formula bar, you can see, sure enough, the formula is there. So there is something in the cell, but the formula is programmed to show nothing. Now I want to Control Z to undo that delete. All right, so we can use that little construction, if NA formula text, and a double quote, which is actually called a zero length text string. But we can use that formula to document our worksheet formulas. Enter. Now let's look at our third example. Here we're going to create a logical formula. The goal here is we ask the question, did the employee get a bonus? Well, this employee had sales of $2,154.75. And in order to get a bonus in this job, the contract says, well, you have to have 2,000 or more sales. So the goal with the formula is to ask the question, hey, are sales greater than or equal to the bonus hurdle? So down in cell C33, we type an equal sign to start our formula. I'm going to up arrow. And of that cell reference, I want to ask the question, are you greater than or equal to the hurdle? Now in math, there's a single character that shows greater than or equal to. But in Excel and most of Microsoft products and other computer languages, we don't have a single character. So we have to type two comparative operators. We have to type greater than and then a second character, equal sign. Now the greater than, notice that's an alligator mouth, and the big side is pointing towards C31. So the question is always, is that bigger than? And the little side is going to point towards the 2,000. So greater than or equal to, up arrow. And that formula will deliver one of two answers. And it's not yes or no. It's going to be true or false. Now notice there is an equal sign as the first character. That, of course, defines the formula. But there's a second equal sign. And anytime you use a second equal sign or any of the comparative operators in your formula, you've converted the formula to a logical formula, and it can only deliver true or false. So when I hit enter, this employee is happy. True, they get the bonus. Now if I change this to 1,999.99, oh man, that employee is bummed out. Now let's investigate number formatting to see how people make mistakes with worksheet formulas. Now I want to decrease the decimals, and we learned how to Control 1. We also learned how to use our quick access toolbar. But I got to show you a great keyboard. Anytime you have commands in your QWAT or in the ribbon, and they don't have a built-in keyboard like Control-C for copy, we can use the Alt key to access anything in the quick access toolbar or in the tabs in the ribbon. All right, I have the cell selected where I want to decrease the decimals. And here's how the Alt key works, and it works differently than Control keys. All I have to do is tap the Alt key. So I'm going to tap it. I let go of the key. I'm not holding it. Immediately we can see screen tips pop up for the QWAT, the quick access toolbar, and the tabs in the ribbon. Now the option we want is the second option in the QWAT, the decrease decimal button. To access this, we tap 2. But before I do that, watch what happens down here when I tap 2. Immediately, the decimals are decreased by 1. Now let's do it again. Tap Alt, tap 2. And now we have no decimals showing. But uh-oh. On the surface of the spreadsheet, it looks like the formula is giving us the wrong answer. Well, the beautiful thing about worksheet formulas, and actually worksheet formulas will help us get out of trouble, is a formula like this is never going to see the number formatting. So even though we think we have exactly 2,000 for both numbers, the formula knows better. So when you see a false like this, you want to investigate. Well, that number is 2,000. Uh-oh, that's the problem. Now I want to access the first button on the quat. And this time I know in advance that I want to decrease 2 times. So I hold the Alt key down and tap the 1 key once and twice. Now one other thing about the Alt key. If I hit Alt, notice the Home tab says H, Insert says N, Data says A. So later we'll hit N, and then we'll hit V because we want to open the pivot table dropdown. Now I'm going to click Escape. We'll see those type of Alt keyboards later. All right, so these are the 3 main types of formulas. We have a number formula, a text formula, and a logical formula. And notice the default alignment helps us immediately recognize that we have a number, text, and a logical value. We also saw for this number formula a math operator. For this text formula, we saw a text function. And for this logical formula, we saw a comparative operator. Now I want to scroll down and talk about one of the most important things when building Excel formulas. And that is Excel's golden rule. Now before we learn the rule, let's consider this email. The email we just got said 23 of the 30 students in the class passed the class with a 2.0 grade. This was more than the 80% who passed in the previous class. Now right off the bat, you're suspect of the math. So you want to use Excel to test and see if the current pass rate is actually greater than 80%. Here's what you don't want to do. This completely violates Excel's golden rule. We're going to make a formula, so I'll type an equal sign, and then we're going to hard code the numbers into the formula. You should almost never do this. So we have 23, and we need to divide, so we use / by 30. When I hit Enter, well, sure enough, I immediately get my answer. But there are a bunch of problems with this. The first one is when you open this workbook tomorrow, you might not have any idea how you calculated that number. And there's no label telling you what that number is. And the numbers we put in, called formula inputs, they don't have labels, and the numbers are not in the cell to allow quick and easy update. The final problem is hard coding numbers into formulas like this is one of the leading causes of worksheet errors. So escape, delete. Here's Excel's golden rule. If an Excel solution input can change, put it into a cell, label it, and refer to it in the formula or the solution with a cell reference or table reference. Now what we're going to do is build an Excel model. And an Excel model is just something that follows Excel's golden rule. It is an Excel solution built to solve a problem, make a calculation, or perform data analysis that can be used more than one time. Now we want to follow Excel's golden rule and build an Excel model to solve this problem. Now think about this. This is a teeny problem, but we still want to be consistent in how we solve problems in Excel. So we're going to come down here and list all of the number inputs, the labels for those inputs, and then whatever calculations we make, we'll list labels also. So we can read this and very carefully pick out all the details. It says 23 of the 30 students. So I'm going to start with a 23. That's number students passed. And we'll assume greater than or equal to 2.0. Now I'll use tab and then type 23. Now watch what happens when I hit Enter. Because I've entered the data left to right, when I hit Enter, the cursor ends up here because it assumes I want to do the same pattern. Total students in class, tab, 30, Enter. Now it says this was more than 80% who passed in the previous class. So we'll label the 80% as percent passed in last class. Tab. Now previously when we entered a decimal and added a percent symbol, we did 0.8, Control Enter, Control 1, and then added percent. You absolutely can do it that way. Click OK. But now I want to Control Z on the number formatting, Control Z on entering the bit of data. Now instead of using a two-step process, I want to enter the number 0.8 and add percentage number formatting in one step. And here's how you do it. I'm going to type 80 and then 0.00. Now, right now, if you hit Enter, you'll put the integer 80 in the cell. But as soon as you add a percent symbol, Excel knows to put 0.8 into the cell and then add percentage number formatting with 2 decimals showing. So now when I hit Enter, that's the one-step method. Now, one of the calculations we're going to make, percent that passed this class, tab. Now we'll create a formula, equal sign, up arrow 3 times, divided by up arrow twice. Because the next step is to add percent number formatting. Control Enter, Control 1, percentage. Now remember, number formatting like this is like a facade. It's only on the surface of the spreadsheet. The number is only being displayed this way. That number with all those unrounded decimals are still going to be in the cell. Now I click OK. Now I can clearly see that the percentage pass this class is not greater than 80%. Enter. Now looking up here, the email says more than 80%. So I actually want to compare these two numbers in a logical formula. So let's put a label, percent this class, and it's greater than. We do not have an equal sign because it says more than 80%. Percent last class, tab. And we can do a logical formula, equal sign, up arrow, greater than, up arrow twice. Now when I hit Enter, I have a formula telling me, in fact, the pass rate this class is not greater than the last class. Now let's add some formatting. I'm going to use my selection cursor, click and hold and drag up to the Home Ribbon tab. Let's open the Home Ribbon tab, right-click, uncheck Collapse Ribbon. The keyboard to hide and collapse, of course, is Control F1. And up here in Font, click the drop-down on Borders, and I want all borders. For the 2 formula cells, I'll select with my selection cursor, come up to Font, drop down on the Paint bucket. I always get confused, and basically all Excel users at one time in their life get confused between these. But that has the letter A, so that's Font. This is tipping the bucket on its side, so it's going to fill up the cells. Now, I have this color here. If you don't see this, you can go to More Colors. Whatever color you pick for formulas, just be consistent. I'm going to click More Colors, and I usually pick that one right there. Actually, the reason I picked this color decades ago was because the ruled accounting paper that I used to use was that color. Click OK. You could add other formatting here if you'd like. I'm going to leave it like that. Now off to the side, this is not required, but I'm going to make sure that I can see the formula. So let's type equals if NA. I see it in blue, so I hit Tab. Right in value, I'm going to type the second function. This is called nesting a function. Formula, I see it highlighted in blue, so I hit Tab. Now reference, for the time being, we're just going to click this cell. That way it'll show just the formula for that cell. Close parentheses. Now the screen tip for if NA pops back up. It reminds you, you just finished value, so I'm going to type a comma. And then value if NA, a 0 length text string. Close parentheses. Now because our next action is to copy the formula, use Control Enter. And now the formula in C49 is showing. But I also want the same formula right here. Now let's hit F2. That cell reference in the formula, when we copy it, that's going to be called a relative cell reference. That means from the point of view of the formula, where am I going to look? I'm always going to look 1, 2 cells to the left. So Control Enter, and this will be the first time that we've copied a formula. To copy a formula, we're not going to use our selection cursor, and we're definitely not going to use our move cursor. We're going to try to point to that little green box called a fill handle, hover, and when you see the crosshair, that's what Bill Gates likes to call it. I like to call it an angry rabbit. So when you see your angry rabbit, click, hold the click, and drag down. That allows us to copy the formula. Now when I let go, sure enough, the formula was copied down. Now I want to click in the top cell and hit F2. Remember, that cell reference is called a relative cell reference. From the point of view of the formula, it's always going to look 1, 2 cells to the left. So when I hit Enter and F2, it's still pointing relatively from the point of view of the formula in the same location. 1, 2 cells to the left. Now, next video, we'll learn a lot more about copying formulas, spelling formulas also, and about the different types of cell references. Now, that's the first time that we copied a formula. But I have some great news for you. I really had to show you this old school method because this is how we've been creating copied formulas for 40 years. That's 4 decades in Excel. But in Microsoft 365, there's a new way. Instead of entering a formula and manually copying it down, we can create one formula based on both cells, and it will spill down automatically. So let's try that again. Equals if n tab, form tab. And now for reference, instead of just clicking on one cell, I'm going to enter or select 1, 2 cells. So I have the range C49 to C50. Now because that's 2 cells, that's going to inform formula text and if NA to deliver 2 answers. Now let's close parentheses. I see value is already completed, so comma, value if NA, double quote, close parentheses. Right now I haven't entered the formula. Look up in the formula bar, you can see it's there. But watch what happens when I hit Enter. This is called a dynamic spilled array formula. When I hit Enter, sure enough, I see the formulas from both cells. Now notice I hit Enter, so the cursor went down. But look at the formula bar. That's a grayed out formula. That's like a ghost formula. That means that the formula calculated something here, but the formula is not really in that cell. When you create a dynamic spilled array formula, the formula is only in the top cell. So watch this. I'm going to click back on the top cell. Oh, sure enough, the formula is not a ghost. I can see it up in the formula bar. If I hit Enter and then F2, sure enough, there's nothing there. If I type something like a letter and hit Enter, the dynamic spilled array formula is polite. It says there's not enough room to spill. As soon as I delete this, then sure enough, it spills. Now, as we'll see next video when we learn more about dynamic spilled array formulas, we'll see that there's a number of different advantages. For this example here, the main advantage is we didn't have to enter it and manually copy it. We just created one formula, and it automatically spilled. Now, again, next video, we'll learn a lot more about dynamic spilled array formulas. Now, I want to type over here what type of formula this is, since we're just still learning. Number formula, and this is a logical formula, and Enter. Now, here's the good news. We built a model, so when an email comes later and says, uh-oh, I made a mistake, it was 25 of 30, not 23 of 30. We already built a model. So all I have to do is come to this cell right here. And here's the real beauty of Excel. This is the original idea from Bricklin and Frankston, the 2 guys who built the very first spreadsheet, VisiCalc. Their idea was to visually display all of the inputs on the surface of the spreadsheet, build a formula, and then when I change it, and notice I don't have to hit delete first. I just select the cell and type 25. And when I hit Enter, instantly everything updates. Our visual calculator, as they called this back in 1979, or now our Excel model following Excel's golden rule, is absolutely amazing. All right, so in this section of the video, we talked about Excel's golden rule and building an Excel model. We'll follow these rules throughout the entire class. We talked about 3 different types of formulas: logical, text, and number. We also talked about the importance of number formatting. And all of these notes here are over in the PDF notes also. Now we want to go over and talk about the second main topic in this video, data analysis. Now on this sheet here, we have the definition of data analysis. And it's quite simple. Convert raw data into useful information to gain insight and help make decisions. Now, you might hear the synonyms data analytics, business intelligence, but it's all just data analysis. And the goal of data analysis is to help make data-driven decisions which tend to be more accurate and help to achieve goals more consistently. Here's 2 examples. We have sales data in a table. This is a table. Field names or column headers at the top, date, sales rep, sales. And each row or record represents a sales transaction. We're going to take that table of data and convert it into a monthly sales rep sales report. We're going to ask the question, what are the top 3 sales amounts? Now, actually, the question before we start dealing with the raw data is, if a bonus is given for the 3 biggest monthly sales amounts, who gets the bonus? We're going to take this raw data, create this pivot table report with sales rep and month, and then the total for each month and sales rep, and then add conditional formatting to show the 3 biggest. Not only that, but when we add data later to the table, we'll just refresh and we'll see the latest 3 biggest values. So from the raw data into useful information to make decisions, we know our answer: Chantel, Joe, and Tyrone. Now our second example, we have sales data in a table, and we need to convert it into a monthly sales trends chart. The question is, what were the sales trends over the last 6 months? We take our table of raw data, using a pivot table and a pivot chart, we create our monthly sales trend chart. So it looks like up, little bit down, way up, a little bit down, and then way up. So overall, the trend seems to be up. Now we'll do both of these examples in just a moment, but we want to define a few other terms. Let's scroll down. Now raw data is defined as data stored in its smallest form in a cell. This is not raw data. All this data is stored together. It's really hard to access that number to add, access the sales rep name to use as a condition for adding, or the date to figure out which month it is. Here's raw data. Column header, or what's called a field name at the top, date, person, sales. And then in separate cells, there's the date, that's the person who made the sale, and that's the amount. Now a proper data set, that's this, known as a data set, there it is, or just table, that's a table. A table is made up of fields, that's a column in a table, column 1, 2, 3. But we don't call them column 1, 2, 3. We have field names. This is really important because it tells you what data to put into this column. And later when we're accessing data in this table, we say, hey, I want to look at the date field. So these are called fields, sometimes also called column headers or headers. And then a record, that's each row in the table. Each row in this case represents a sales transaction. Now table requirements when you have a table in the Excel worksheet. Well, field names must be in the first row. So here's the first row. Records of related data are in subsequent rows. And when you have a table in the Excel worksheet, as opposed to later we'll have tables in the data model or Power Query, when the table is in the Excel worksheet, you have to have empty cells all the way around. You cannot put a little note next to a table because it becomes part of the table, and the tools we use for data analysis and tables do not work. Now, I have empty cells all the way around. If you were to delete this column That's fine too because it's touching the row headers. The table can also be touching the column headers. Now I'm going to Control Z. This is also an example of a table, a single column of survey data. But there it is, field names in the first row, records, in this case responses, in subsequent rows, and we have empty cells all the way around. Now we want to click on the sheet DA Tools. Now here's a list of some of the data analysis tools in Excel. And throughout the class, we'll learn about all of these tools. In this video, though, we will see the Excel table features: sort, filter, pivot table to make reports, Excel charts to visualize, and conditional formatting to visualize. Now all of these notes on this sheet are also in our PDF notes. Now we want to try our data analysis examples. And before we go to DA example, let's go look at the answer. Our goal is to go from this data set into this summary report, add conditional formatting, and then make a second pivot table with a sales trend chart. Now let's go over to DA example. We are given a proper data set with date, sales rep, and sales. But because we want to be able to add records to the bottom of the table later and have our reports and charts update, we want to first convert the proper data set into an Excel table. The way you do this is you make sure that you have a proper data set, field names in the first row, records in subsequent rows, and then you click in a single cell. Don't highlight some, just one cell. Go up to Insert, and then click on Table. Now notice the screen tip tells us the keyboard, Control T. And because the Excel table feature is so handy, we're always going to use the keyboard, Control T. The Create Table dialog box pops up. Because we have field names at the top and it has some formatting to distinguish it from the data below, it knows that we have what they call headers checked. Now when we click OK, it adds formatting for us. It also adds sorting and filtering drop-downs, which we're not going to use in this video. And the most important thing is if we add a new column or new rows to the bottom of the table, all of that new data will be recognized by any report or charts or other things like formulas that are pointing to the table. Now, as soon as you Control T to a table, you want to go up to Table Design, Properties, and name your table. Now, we're going to call this F Sales. The F is because these are the type of facts that we're going to summarize. And the table is about sales, so we called it Sales. Tab. Now, if I click off to the side, up in the name box where defined names or table names can appear, there it is. If I click on F Sales, it jumps and highlights the inside part of the table. Now we want to go back over here to the answer sheet. And the goal is somehow to get a unique list of sales rep names from this column here, and then take these transactional daily dates and roll them up into months. And then from the sales column, sum based on two conditions. So in this cell right here, the pivot table is not adding everything from this column. It's only adding records where it finds the sales rep name Chantel. So there's Chantel, Chantel, Chantel. And the month is February. Now this table happens to be sorted, so it's not till we get down to there's a record that has two conditions. The month is February in the date column, and the sales rep is Chantel in the sales rep column. That means it will get this number, and then these two conditions are met, so get this number. It'll get all the numbers that match and sum them. So really, when we use the pivot table feature based on a proper data set, what we're really doing is making some calculation based on conditions and criteria. In this case, we have two conditions. In order for the record to be included, the sales rep has to be Chantel, and the month has to be February. All right, so let's go back over to DA example. All right, to create our pivot table, we're going to take this proper data set, in our case, an Excel table, select a single cell, go up to the Insert tab, Tables Group, Pivot Table dropdown, and click from table range. Now I want to click Escape because I got to teach you the keyboard. We're going to make a lot of pivot tables in this class, and of course, keyboards are fast. We hit the Alt key. We see N for Insert, so I tap N. I see V for Pivot Table Dropdown, so I tap V. I see T for our From Table Range, so I tap T. Now I'm going to click Escape. Even though this seems like a long keyboard, it is fast. Alt-NVT. That opens the Pivot Table from Table or Range dialog box. Now notice there's the name of the table, so it will always get all the new data from the table. Now we want to choose where this goes. I don't want it on a new worksheet. So we select Existing Worksheet for location. Let's click the title bar and drag because I want to put this in F6. So I select F6. I see it there. Now I click OK. And over on the right is our Pivot Table Fields task pane in the top. This is a field list. 1, 2, 3. Those are the fields from our original table. We get to drag these fields down as conditions to columns, filters, and rows. And we get to drag fields like sales down to values to make our calculations. Now looking at our finished report, what are we going to need in the rows? We need a unique list of sales reps, but we also, for each row under sales rep, need a unique list of months. Well, the pivot table feature makes creating these types of unique lists easy. There's sales rep, there's rows, so all I have to do is click on the field and drag it down to rows. When I drop it, instantly I get a unique list. Now I want to uncheck this just for a moment. We'll add it back later. And I want to show you what happens if I drag date down to rows. When I drop it, instantly it creates a unique list of months. And if there were more than one year, it would create a unique list of years also. Now up here I can see there's actually 2 new fields added to the table. Now they don't appear here because anytime you use the pivot table feature, it actually takes all of the data and stores it in a behind-the-scenes location called a pivot table cache. Now we can't go look at that pivot table cache, but in that data set, it memorized this new column months. Now we don't want days or date, and there's our unique list of months. Now we want a unique list of months for each sales rep. So I'm going to click and drag, and very carefully. By the way, notice the no, no, no symbol. You can't drop it. You can drop it to columns, filters, or rows to add conditions. Now notice there's an icon. That blue means column. That blue means filter. That blue means row. And that blue means values. Now we want to drag this above. That's not above. The green line, when I drag it above, that tells me when I drop it, now that's on top. And for each one of these conditions, there's a unique list of months. Now your pivot table might not show the field names, and that's not a good thing. To manually change your pivot table, you go up to Design, over to Layout, Report Layout, and Show in Tabular. You can also use Outline Form. Both of these will list the field names. So you should select Tabular Form. Now I have my default set on Tabular Form, so I got to show you how to change that because we almost always want field names listed in our report. We go up to File, down to Options. This opens up Excel Options. We click on Data on the left, then Edit Default Layout. And you want to check this drop down for Report Layout to Tabular. You can try Outline and Tabular if you like one better. Either one is fine because they show the field names. Select Tabular and then click OK. Now every time you create a pivot table, you'll see those field names. Now in this case, this field says months date. I don't really want that. So you're also allowed to type a new report column header name as long as it's not one of the field names that already exists in the table. So I'm just going to type months and enter. Now we have the conditions for our calculations in the rows. So the next step is to drag our sales field down to values. Now this is a number field, meaning it has numbers in it. So when I drop it, it defaults to sum. Just to show you how powerful a pivot table is, let's uncheck sales. And if we drag sales rep down to values, this is a text field, so it defaults to count. Now I don't want sales rep down there, so we can click the drop down and say remove field. Or from the old days, you can just click and drag anywhere, and it's removed from the report. Now let's drag sales down to values, and there's our conditional calculations. Sure enough, it got exactly the correct total. It went through this entire data set, and only when the record said Chantel and February did it take that number. So it did that for each one of these. It also has a subtotal. That meant it found all of the records that had Chantel. Now, count and sum are not the only calculations you can make here. Now, 2 videos ahead, we'll see all sorts of amazing calculations. But just as a preview, if you right-click in the values area, there's 2 places to make calculations. Summarize values by, that has aggregate calculations. Those are calculations that take a bunch of items and deliver a single answer, like summing, when you take a bunch of numbers and you deliver one answer. Or averaging, take a bunch of numbers, deliver one answer. Here, for show values as, they can do things like calculate the percent of column total or percent of grand total. Now, we'll see those calculations 2 videos ahead. I clicked Escape. Now, in a pivot table, we want to add number formatting. Now, if we had calculations with formulas in the cells, we'd have to highlight all the cells that we want to apply the formatting and Control 1. But in a pivot table, it's easier. We can select any one cell in the values area, right-click, and the option we want is number formatting. We don't want format cells because that opens the normal format cells dialog box with all 6 tabs. We want to right-click number formatting. Now, Microsoft made a mistake when they named this dialog box. It should say number formatting for values area of pivot table, but they called it format cells. Now, you can tell this is the one for the pivot table because there's only one tab. And the beauty of this is when I select, and I have a $sign at the top, so I'm not going to select currency. I'm going to select number. There's my preview. Check use a comma. And when we apply this number formatting, it's to the actual field. So all of the cells, including the subtotals and grand total, will get the number formatting. When I click OK, that is an amazing report. Now, why is a pivot table called a pivot table? Because you can take any field. Let's say you created this report, and your boss said, no, I wanted months across the columns, sales reps down the rows. Well, the pivot table feature makes it easy to pivot a row condition to a column condition. So we simply drag month over to columns, and instantly you have what is called a cross-tab report. Now, the column isn't wide enough, so it puts up that fence. We can click between J and K, click and drag. Now, it's called a cross-tabulated report because at any intersecting cell, it uses the column header condition and the row header condition for making the conditional calculation. So right here, those are the records that have a March date and sales rep Joe. That's the total for Chantel, and that's the grand total. That grand total right there is like adding the entire column. Now let's drag month down below sales rep. Man, that's amazing, just pivoting our report. Now we want to use something called conditional formatting to highlight only the 3 biggest values. And if we add new data and refresh this report, I want the conditional formatting to automatically update. Now, just as with cells and a pivot table, cells you have to highlight all the cells before adding formatting. in the values area of a pivot table, you can just select one cell. Now we want to go up to Home, Styles, Conditional Formatting dropdown, and there's a bunch of great ways to add formatting. You could specify a certain hurdle, greater than, less than. Top bottom rules, that's what we want. Data bars, the tallest bar will be on the biggest number, the shortest bar on the smallest number. Color scales. This will color code your numbers from smallest to biggest. We'll learn about some of these visualization options later. For the time being, we want top 10. Well, let's click. And the dialog box allows us to set it at 3. I don't usually accept the default, so I click the drop down and go down to Custom Format. When I click, there's 4 tabs that allow you to add some formatting. Let's do fill green, font, let's say white. Click OK. Click OK. Now the funny thing is, it did not highlight the 3 biggest. But this little option only shows up in a pivot table. I can click the drop down. The default is selected cells. We could include all the numbers, including the grand total. That's not what we want. Or all cells for months. So we select this one, and there's the top 3. 1921 and 19,000. Tyrone, Joe, and Chantel. Now here's what's so amazing about combining a pivot table and an Excel table. If we scroll down, I included some more data down here. Now to select this, we could click with our selection cursor, click and drag, or you can click in one cell, and we're going to use Control asterisk, either Control Shift 8 or Control asterisk on the number pad. That highlights everything in the current range. We're going to use Control C to copy. And because it's an Excel table, I click in the first cell below the table in the first column, not here, right here. And when I Control V, instantly those records are incorporated into the table object. Now, if your table does not automatically expand, then there's a setting in Options, so File, Options. And Microsoft put it in a terrible place. It's so hard to find for so many people. Proofing, autocorrect options, format as you type, and you have to check this because if it didn't work, that was unchecked. Include new rows and columns in table. By the way, this information is in the PDF notes also. Now the new table object contains all the data, but when we scroll up, why didn't the pivot table instantly update? Now formulas would instantly update. And later in the class, we'll see how to create reports like this with formulas. But it's much more complicated to create reports with formulas. But here's the reason it didn't update. Remember, when you create a pivot table, it takes whatever the data is and stores it in the pivot table cache. So no problem. All we have to do to refresh the pivot table cache is right-click anywhere in the pivot table and click Refresh. And just like that, now we have January to June totals for each sales rep and the conditional formatting updated. By the way, there's also in the Data Ribbon tab Refresh and Refresh All option. Now from our data set, we want to create our sales trend chart. Now notice that the cursor is inside the pivot table somewhere, and that allows the pivot table fields task pane to show. When I click inside the table to create our second pivot table, it goes away for this pivot table. By the way, if you lose it and want it back, just click inside or right-click, and sometimes this will be unselected. All right, we click in a single cell, and we're going to use our keyboard to create our monthly sales pivot table. Alt-NVT, that's the correct table on the existing. We're going to put this in J6, click OK. Now because this is looking at the same pivot cache, it remembers that there's a month column. So I'll drag month down to rows. I see my unique list. Sales down to values. Right-click, number formatting, number, comma, click OK. Select the column header, and type months and enter. Now from this pivot table, we can create a chart. Insert, over to charts. And when we want to see trends, the perfect chart is a line chart. So I'll click the drop down, and the first one is fine, so I will click. We can move the chart with our move cursor. Be sure not to click inside, because if you use your move cursor inside of here, it'll move internally pieces you may not want. So click the outside edge. And by the way, we can move it and snap to grid if we hold the Alt key. So I'm holding Alt and moving it. It snapped perfectly to the grid. I can also resize it. Click, hold Alt, and snap to grid. Now the most important rule for creating charts and for visualizing data, and this rule was created by the famous visualizing expert Edward Tufte, and he said, no chart junk. And that means you must remove all elements in the chart that do not help to deliver the message. Now for us, the message we want to deliver is, what's the trend? So certainly, that chart element is definitely helping to deliver the message. But look at this. That's a chart title that says the word total. That doesn't help deliver the message at all. Now to change the chart title, you can click twice, and when you see the dotted line, you can highlight and type a new title. But if you click on the outside edge and see the solid line, you can link this to the cells. So I see the solid line, and now I type an equal sign. That shoots me up to the formula bar. I click on cell K2. I can see the formula up in the formula bar. And when I hit Enter, now it's linked to the cell. If I want to edit, I can simply edit. And this is following Excel's golden rule, of course. And when I hit Enter, that updates. I'm going to Control Z. So for the rest of the elements, we look at them and we ask the question, is this helping to deliver the message? Now, a legend like this, when there's only one element, is doing nothing to help deliver the message. So I'm going to click on that and use the Delete key. Also, this green plus allows you to add and remove items by using the checklist. We could have removed that legend right here. Now, one element that's not in this list right here are these field buttons. Now, it does allow you to filter, but remember, we have a pivot table. So we can filter it here, and that's automatically reflected in the chart. So really, these are visually not contributing anything. Now we can remove these by selecting them and using right-click, hide all field buttons on chart. Also, if we have it selected, we can go up to the context-sensitive ribbons. These three tabs are just for the chart. Click on Pivot Table Analyze, and there's a drop-down for field buttons, hide all. By the way, when I select this chart, there's three tabs in the ribbon. If I click inside the pivot table, there's two specialized pivot table tabs in the ribbon. Now back to the chart. Let's select the grid lines. Now if we're going to leave these numbers here, these grid lines might be helpful to help line up whatever the numbers are. But if we delete them, that looks a little bit less cluttered. Again, sometimes you want the lines, sometimes you don't. Now let's come up to this green plus, and I want to add data labels. Now this is helpful if you want to see the trend and the exact numbers. But notice how it does add a little clutter. If you don't want clutter, then you leave these. So you can choose between these two. I'm going to leave the data label so I see the trend and the exact numbers. Let's select the axis, and I'm going to use the Delete key. Now, some of the numbers are sort of in the way, and these data labels are actually grouped together. If you click once, they're all selected, and you can format from the Home ribbon tab or go over to the Format Chart ribbon tab. But if you select the data label a second time, then just that data label is selected, and you can format, or in our case, I want to move it. I'm going to point to the edge and use my Move cursor. Let me click it a little bit further. We can see that line. Let's do it for this one also. For the two down trends, I'm going to have those below and then the uptrends above. So that is looking pretty good. As we look at each element in our chart, it looks like all the elements are working together to give us the overall impression that, yes, the trend is up. There's two slight downs, but overall, the trend is up. So the chart is finished. But wouldn't it be cool to have a chart that could show us the trends for each sales rep? Well, let's click back in the pivot table. The only condition we have in the pivot table is months. And that means this is for January, February, March, and so on. But what if I wanted all of these monthly totals just for Chantel or just for Jim? To do that, we come over to our field list, and we want to drag sales rep down to filters. Filters adds a row right above the report that says all, because these are the sales for everyone. But from the drop down, I can select Chantel, click OK, and that is amazing. Now, from a calculating point of view, that cell right there is showing the total for the month of January and Chantel. Here, it's for February and Chantel. So a filter affects every single calculation in the pivot table, whereas when you drag a field down to rows or columns, it does it for each individual row, or in our cross tab for each individual column. Now, instead of adding a filter above, there's a much better way. I'm going to click and drag this off. With the pivot table selected, we come up to Pivot Table Analyze, and there's a filter group. And here's a visual filter called a slicer. So I'm going to click Insert Slicer. Check Sales Rep, click OK, click on Title Bar and drag. We can resize. We can also, with our context-sensitive ribbon tab for Slicer, we can have multiple columns. We could add formatting and other ways to change this. But watch this. It's going to affect the pivot table, and of course, by default, because the chart is connected to the pivot table, the chart. There's Chantel's trend, Jim, Joe, and Tyrone. And then, if I want to see it all, I click the red X. So what we have going on here in terms of data analysis is we have an Excel table, which gives us a dynamic data source. We have two pivot table reports that allow us to make calculations with conditions and criteria. We have a visualization, which gives us a quick impression, or in this case, a much easier way to see the trend than with the actual numbers. And we have a slicer that allows us to filter a pivot table or a chart. Now, 2 videos ahead, we'll get to see some more about data analysis, including other tools. All right, so in this video, we saw how to do data analysis with various Excel worksheet tools. Over on the calc sheet, we talked all about worksheet formulas. We saw there's 3 main types: number, text, and logical. We talked about different formula elements and how number formatting interacts with a formula. We talked about Excel's golden rule and how to build a model. Now, next video will be the 3rd video in this class, and we'll talk more about worksheet formulas and building models. All right, we'll see you next video.